Good evening. I'm Juan Zavala, Vice President for University Advancement for Lamar University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our digital gathering of Lamar University alumni and friends. During this time of social distancing, we felt the need to keep our Lamar University community together, and these digital gatherings are a great way for us to do that. We were fortunate enough to have some distinguished alumni who have agreed to take time from their very busy schedules to join us and make presentations, and you have picked an extraordinary night to be with us for a really topical and interesting and topic with one of the most fascinating people you're ever going to meet. Our participant tonight is distinguished alumna Angela Blanchard. She's going to talk to us about wisdom during times of disasters. Angela is President Emerita of Baker Ripley in Houston. She's a globally recognized practitioner in community development, in disaster recovery, and in effective long-term integration of immigrants and refugees. Her breakthrough strategies in Houston to revitalize neighborhoods have now been used worldwide for cities who are facing complex challenges in community transformation. A bachelor's degree in accounting from Lamar University. In 2017, she was our inaugural keynote speaker at the Women in Philanthropy program and also a commencement speaker that same year. The following year, Lamar University recognized Angela as distinguished alumna. She has too numerous to name, awards from many top institutions. She's been recognized with the Heinz Award in human condition category. She's been invited to the White House 3 different times. She's been profiled in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, CNN, NPR, and of course, Cardinal Cadence. Fast Company magazine named Angela one of the most creative people in the nation. She's a non-resident senior fellow in the Centennial Scholar Initiative at the Brookings Institution. She's on the board of the Business Innovation Factory. She's on the board of the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy at Rice. She is a part of the Swearer Center as a Taubbaum Fellow. And most recently, she is a social entrepreneur in residence at Brown University. And tonight, she is the speaker at Lamar University's alumni gathering. Angela, thank you so much for being here tonight.
I'm so excited to be with you. It's great to see you again, Juan. And it's great to be with the Lamar community.
And so before we launch into this, we're all social distancing. How does Angela Blanchard do social distancing?
Well, a lot of Zoom and a lot of gardening. And the gardening is more to deal with the frustration of not being able to be with people.
Yeah.
So I think I'm doing what everyone is doing, trying to look out for myself and everyone in my community.
So that leads us into the discussion for tonight. And for our people who are watching this evening, a lot of the topics we're going to be focusing on are taken from Juan's perspective directly from angelablanchard.com. I would suggest you go there when you need some inspirational reading. It's a really way to get sort of revitalized. Don't go there until this program is over, but do go to angelablanchard.com. But I have to tell you, Angela, in looking at your 13 points of wisdom, the thing that strikes me the most each time I go there is the quote, "The human spirit is not extinguishable." Angela, you have seen some stuff. So for you to say the human spirit is not extinguishable, gosh, that means a lot.
I've seen some stuff, yes, Juan. And one thing that sticks with me is this extraordinary capacity we have as human beings to reinvent ourselves, to reinvent our lives, to rebuild communities. And I know I'm speaking to an audience, many of whom are longtime Golden Triangle residents. And we see in the Golden Triangle really a sort of indomitable spirit, willingness people have to recreate their lives again and again, to rebuild after upheaval. So I've seen it in the refugee camps in the Middle East and places where almost the unthinkable has happened. In Detroit, when Detroit was flat on its back economically in 2013, and Germany when Syrians were arriving after the war in Syria. So, I mean, place after place, situation after situation, what we witness is human beings in this really inspired way, standing up starting over, rebuilding.
Some like we're now facing in this pandemic, which shockingly affects 100% of the people, which is an extraordinary moment in our history. But something that really resonates with me in having lived through some disasters is the concept of, my first reaction is, this isn't my fault. I didn't earn this trouble. So you put points on
yeah.
that.
So two things. One, we should pause for a moment and acknowledge something remarkable. So what is remarkable is that almost something like 80% of the people in the world, in dealing with something new and threatening, made great sacrifices, stayed home, stayed away from work, stayed away from their friends and places of worship in order to protect themselves and their neighbors. Now, if 2 months ago I had said 80% of the world will agree to look after one another, to make these tremendous sacrifices in this way, you would have said I was nuts. Yet, we're doing it. So pay attention to that, because that's extraordinary, and it would be easy to dial right past it and think about what's ahead. But I want to pause for that and acknowledge everyone who made sacrifices to keep others safe. And then I want to respond to what you're saying. There's a kind of human mindset. It's perfectly natural, and it says something along these lines. I'm a responsible person. I work hard. I do the things I'm told to do. I save a little money. I pay my bills on time as much as possible. When I go to work, I put my best effort forward. I'm really faithful to my family, and I look after the people around me, and I practice my faith. And so we make this one-sided bargain with the universe. It says, I'm going to do all these things, and things are going to go well. But that's not the trip we're on. This is, as I tell my students, this is earth. It ain't heaven. So what happens when this unthinkable event occurs, when we're shipwrecked? Some catastrophic event happens and we're washed up on this unfamiliar shore, is we feel like, how could this be? And I did everything I was supposed to do. But that's not the journey we're on. The journey we're on is one that's often filled with upheaval and displacement and sometimes chaos and often suffering. So this is what we have to come to terms with, especially right in this moment.
Which leads on to another one of the points that you make that again, feels so right at this moment. You start out by saying you can't build on broken.
Right.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean for us by you can't build on broken?
Well, it's not perfect grammar, Juan, and don't blame Lamar for that. There's a lot of times in Texas when we'll sacrifice the grammar rules to make the point. But that really came out of my work in community development. You see, when we go about helping, we often think first, what's wrong with these people? Why aren't they getting it right? Why don't they do things like we expect them to? And so most of our help when we're in that mindset, is really a form of aggression. I'm here to kind of guide you to be like I think you ought to be. So in my work with communities, very troubled communities, what I would often go in with is a set of questions to unearth first, who's already leading here? Who's already working here? What's already working here? What has this community already created for itself? What have they crafted in the way of a center or a place or a way of helping one another that can be built upon? And this is a really powerful way to look at the world. It doesn't mean we skim past problems. In fact, just the opposite. It says, if we're willing to look for strengths, to look for those gifts and talents and abilities that each human being has, each community, every family, and build upon that, then that's the foundation for tackling some of the most difficult problems, some of the most formidable circumstances.
So along those lines, one of the guidelines you give us as we go down this road, you come to the fork in the road, choosing between resignation and acceptance.
Well, I have to credit Galveston after Ike for that. I owe that all to Galveston. So I had gone down to Galveston. Lotta Ann Thomas, Mayor Thomas, who's no longer with us, was a dear friend. And I had gone to Galveston at her request to take a look at some of the challenges that Galveston was facing after Ike. And I was driving around and I passed this building. It was kind of a bar. And it had a hand-painted sign, because I'm assuming that the actual sign had blown away. And the sign said, "Hard Times and Misery Saloon." And it just cracked me up, because I thought about how we come to this fork in the road and we can take the Hard Times and Misery Saloon path. And that's where I climb up on the bar stool and I tell people, my sad story for the rest of my life, and explain in detail how I've suffered. And also, tell them whose fault it is too, Or the alternative is to say, for whatever reason, perhaps reasons too complicated for me to ever understand, this is my life now. These are my challenges now. This is what I'm faced with now, and I'm going to step into it and embrace it. And I think that fork, that decision to either be resigned and bitter or accepting and hopeful is a really powerful decision. My 7.5 billion people on Earth. We are both very, very special and not special at all. And, there's suffering in every life. So I think all of the work I've done with people who've faced the unthinkable in their lives, had to leave children behind, struggled across a border between Syria and Lebanon, fought, for their lives, all of those people in some way, those who fared best were willing to embrace the circumstances of their lives and acknowledge them and just assume that journey was meant for them and not be bitter. It's very difficult at times.
Indeed. Well, and that leads us to the question one of our viewers has posted. Shannon apparently has gone to your website and knows, or at least listened to some of your presentations, but she wants you to expound on your definition of loving detachment and why that's so critical now for volunteers and people working to serve others.
So, if I come to you, Juan, and have a gift for you, you'd have to put it in a little container and spray it with Lysol before you opened it. But generally speaking, I offer it to you in the spirit of generosity. Perhaps it's something I imagine you might appreciate or enjoy. But a gift has no strings attached. It has no expectation. And there's this challenge we face when we want to give to others, and that we often treat it like a transaction. I've done this for you. I expect this from you. I've offered this help. You should not only receive it, you should actually do as I would like you to do with your life. And this imposition of our will on others is really it perverts really the generosity that's at the core of what we really want to be doing. And so I think I've told the story before about learning to deal with my father's alcoholism. My father was a recovering alcoholic, and for many years I wanted my father to be sober, and eventually he did become sober. But in the interim, I had to let go. And we find over and over again ourselves in situations where we have to let go and accept the world as it is and not as we would have it be. And it's only from that starting place can we actually be with others in a true and loving way. Because as long as I'm with you and what I'm projecting toward you is my expectation and my demand and my insistence that you live and do as I think you should, then we're going to have troubles. You see it right now in Houston, right now in Texas, because this is the kind of place we are. 29 million Texans are making up their own mind about where they should go, what they should do, if they should wear a mask or not, what kind of mask, how often, inside, outside, etc. And so 29 million Texans making up their own mind, and almost that same number judging everybody else around them. And I think we're going to really have trouble if we go out into the world in this next phase of this disaster with an attitude that everyone should have come to the same conclusion we did, should live the way we think they should. And if they don't, we're entitled to be angry and frustrated or rageful or despairing. And this is a really tough life lesson. No one has an obligation to meet our expectations. And it's kind of like we're going to need to practice a lot of acceptance.
Yeah, that moves us to another point. Another one of our viewers, Jeff, wanted to know if you had advice specifically for the class of 2020, Lamar University and other university graduates just now sort of going as professionals in this type of situation.
So this is a call not for this class as professionals. Yeah. Whatever we raised you for, trained you for, taught you about the world, that's not the world you're moving into. You're moving into a completely different world that's just been upended in extraordinary ways. All bets are off. The rules suspended and new ones in place. You're moving into an unknown territory with only the barest outlines of a map. So this is a time that calls for leaders, and I think our young people are the equal of it. And here's why. Those of us who were taught that every action had to have a plan and a budget and 15 strategies and 150 objectives, this world for us is frightening and really upsetting. But for young people, this is what this generation possesses in the way of strengths. Fast learning, quick willingness to apply what they've learned, an aptitude for experimentation. I learned it, let me try it. Did it work? Let me try something else. This cycling, this improvisational ability, the ability to look around your arena, see what's there, see what's happening, and figure out how to leverage the resources in that arena for an action or a job or a solution. These are strengths. So I have great confidence. I don't think it will be easy. I'm not promising easy. I'm inviting the leaders that I know that you all have graduated from Lamar to step up for the creative enterprise that's before them now, because we have to figure out how to craft a new life out of a very different set of resources and constraints. And that creativity and that improvisational ability is really at the core of what makes our young people strong right now. And I'm 100% behind them applying it.
Beautiful. So your advice is go out and be you.
Yeah. Well, no, oh, for goodness sakes, no. Be better than that. No, but don't be bound by all the careful cautioning. My son said for years, he would say, "Mom, whenever you speak to me, you're always cautioning me." And I realized that I had done that in a way. As a mom, I was trying to be protective. Yeah. And what I realized that not only about my son, but about many other young people, is they are up for the challenge. And I have great confidence in their ability to step into what they're facing now and approach it with everything they have and craft new solutions. Because we have no answers for what this economy is going to look like on the other side. We don't know what our social practices will be. We're all in a state of experimentation, and I have much more confidence in their ability to do that than my own right now.
Well, when you were talking about creativity, you were talking about different things, but it got me to thinking, especially because that amazing piece of art you have behind you. But one of the things that you suggest during a time of disaster is to allow everything that is not destructive.
Yeah. So, I witnessed, I never like to criticize, but I will talk about this one shelter and won't mention where it was. But it was a shelter that was meant to welcome people, but it was incredibly sterile. And every single thing was forbidden. You couldn't mark on the walls, and you couldn't do this, and you couldn't eat anywhere but this certain area, and there was no music allowed, and there was no dancing allowed. Everything was sterile and very constrained. And it didn't feel welcoming. And there was nothing in that arena to remind us of the joy of living. Nothing to remind us of what we are like as humans when we are at our best and our most inventive and our most colorful and our most interesting. So in all disasters, in the community gatherings that come about afterwards, I'm always making sure there are artists there. Because here's the thing about artists is that, they would put color on the walls, and they would put music in the halls, and they would put dance on the stages, and it would remind us that life is really not all struggle, that we have this extraordinary ability to create and invent and celebrate together. So we spend much more time in public policy, for example. We spend tons of time orchestrating laws for what we don't want. And forget that there's so much that if we allow people to be themselves, express themselves, we want this because this is what keeps us alive and flourishing. So one other thing about artists that I really like, New Orleans is one of my very favorite places. And I'm always taken by the street musicians in New Orleans. So they come out, they open their instrument case, and they pick up the instrument and they start to play. There's no audience. There's no money in the case. They just begin. And then the audience comes, and then the dollars are deposited. And I think that this is a time for that sort of spirit, that we begin and then the audience comes. So I love the fact that artists as a group, they're not afraid of a blank sheet of paper or a blank canvas or an empty street. They just begin. Good lessons in that.
Yeah. Well, Nita, and that gets me to thinking another one of the points that I've heard you make before, that the concept about thriving collectively instead of just surviving individually.
Right.
Which is something, you have to live for the moment, but that's something to look forward to on the other side of this pandemic. We will thrive collectively.
Right. So, this is almost, we're almost allergic to this in Texas because in Texas, we think we can Texas strong our way through everything. And one associates Texas strong with a sort of individual swagger, striding down the street, full possession, locked and loaded, ready for whatever happens. But, that particular caricature is not really helpful because really the way human beings triumph is in community. The way we thrive is in community. And what is so difficult about this, when it's a hurricane, we all know how to act in a hurricane. When it's over, we all come together as fast as possible. We barbecue everything that thawed out in our freezers. We do this in a big group. We're reminded we're in this together. What's stressing us out now is that we're not seeing one another. A lot of the devastation, when it's debris piled in the streets, then we can see the pain and we can see the struggle. But when the debris as such, or when the destruction is in the bank account and the loss of the job and the fears and the loneliness, it's hard to see. So right now, it's extremely important to remember we need community, and every single moment, every single day, that every action we take to connect with the people we care about is important. Those threads really will allow us to work together effectively on the other side of this, in the new world we're moving to.
Well, and along those lines, another one of our viewers, Vernon, wants to know if you see a new neighborhood developing after this, or a new way to revitalize our existing neighborhoods after the pandemic.
So tonight, just by coincidence, before I began visiting with you and your Lamar community one, or I should say my Lamar community, I consider myself a member. You know, two gentlemen came by my house. We were standing 6 feet apart, everyone wearing their masks, but they were a part of a collective in our neighborhood that's taken a vacant lot. And in that vacant lot, for the last few months, they've been growing vegetables. And they've done this with the owner's permission. But now those vegetables are going to people in our neighborhood that really are in need of food, and who can't buy it, and some who can't even leave their homes. They're older and they're not well and they can't go to the grocery store. These are the acts of community that actually really determine whether our lives are rich, feel safe, whether we feel like life is worth it, like we're important. It's not the grand schemes that revitalize communities. It's these two gentlemen tonight who have started this garden, who are bringing vegetables to their neighbors. And these are the acts of community building that have great power to transform communities. And it's the gathering, it's the willingness of people doing that in community to join together and work cooperatively. Neighborhoods are transformed that way. I say all the time, everything of value and everything of significance starts small. And to remember also, reality is on the ground, in the neighborhood, not in the headlines. If we believed what the headlines say about us, we would think we were the most vile, greedy, stingy, hateful, mean-spirited species ever to live. And that's not true. So I think the same thing I've always thought. The leaders we need to change any neighborhood are already there. And that anytime we seek to a greater investment in that neighborhood, we should be guided by the people who deeply care, who are already working there, who understand that community and know how to tell its story from the standpoint of its strengths and assets and resources.
Well, and speaking of community leaders, one of our viewers, Jerry, wants to know, based on sort of your experience, what words of advice would you give to community leaders who are looking to sort of talk out loud about the needs of a community and moving forward from here?
I can only share my experience on that, and it's experience I had again and again. Most people will ask you about the needs, but 3 sentences into your description of needs, they've stopped listening, because the chances are you have described needs that exceed anything they're able to do. Conversely, if you start to talk about the strengths, resources, and assets in the community, what it represents, what South Park represents to Beaumont, who grew up there, the significance of each block that surrounds the university, what goes on there every day, who cares, who looks after their neighbors, what the community has built for itself, that's a very different story. now I'm interested because I feel there's already energy. There's already something happening there. Now, if I want to help, I want to follow the flow of that energy as opposed to inserting myself in there to produce a solution that is not fitting for that community. I spent years feeding the bureaucratic beasts of multiple funding sources that demand that you chronicle every single need. And then when you're done, they give you 1% of the resources it would take to solve all that. So it's quite demoralizing if that's where you put your attention. It's far more powerful to encourage and activate everyone in that community that already cares, to band together to figure out what you can do for yourselves, and then with one voice ask for people to pay attention and invest in what's working in that community already. This will seem like a small difference, but it is an enormous difference. An enormous difference. Yeah.
So let's shift back away a little bit from community and back to self-help for a moment. One of the things that you talk about is how isolation is the breeding ground for rage and despair.
Yeah.
And we're isolating. So what is your sage advice for us during this time of isolation?
Well, we may be physically separate, but socially we have to double down on our efforts to remain connected. I think the rage and despair, if on any given day I wake up and I feel left out, written off, unimportant, insignificant, forgotten, there's really only two human reactions to that. There's the giving up, there's the despair that says there's no place for me in the world. And then there's the other reaction, which is rage, like how dare there not be a place for me in the world? And that rage we see people acting that out. If we've told any group of people for many years that they're limited and that what they're entitled to, what they can aspire to is limited, we've consigned and confined them. That breeds rage. There's something about us we don't want to be told. We won't believe, we won't accept that we have no place in the world. And it's too painful. So one of those two reactions occurs. So right now, we have both an obligation to reach out to everyone that we can think of who might be alone, who might be feeling that way. Particularly, imagine all the people who've lost their jobs. In this society, so many people are defined by their work, and to be told there's no work for you and there's no prospect of work for you can produce enormous feelings of worthlessness. So for those people that don't have jobs, it's not just a job and an income or a box of food that they need. It's the connection and being valued and being appreciated and being supported in their efforts to be connected to the rest of the community that they're going to be missing because they're not at work. It's just I could say connect 10,000 times and it wouldn't be enough because we're taught everything else but to do the simple things that really sustain us. And so, it matters. When I get a call from someone that says, "How are you doing? Do you have enough masks?" This is a fantastic, this for me is, oh, good. Somebody remembers I'm actually a white-haired old lady now. So I'm actually in that, I was reading the newspaper and I was talking about the special times of grocery shopping for elderly. And I'm thinking that's so good that they've made that available for old people. And then they said the age and I suddenly realized it was for me and I was quite shocked. I thought they meant the other old people. But I think it's knowing, it's feeling and hearing and getting affirmed that you do count, you do matter, that you didn't disappear from someone's from the orbit of someone just because you're not going to be working with them anymore. All of these things make a great deal of difference in people's well-being. Great deal of difference.
Well, that leads to another one of the points that you made that has really stuck with me is the concept of people can handle the truth.
Yes. Oh, for God's sakes, yes, yes,
And
yeah,
so leaders tend sometimes to be shielding us if we were not able to deal with the reality as it approaches us.
yeah. Well, I have very, very strong feelings about this because um, as I was leading at Baker Ripley and in other circumstances as well, I've followed a policy: when I know it, you know it. Because it's easy as a leader to think I need to hang on to this knowledge because I'm not really sure what people are going to do if I give them this information. And I want to control what they do. So then I start parsing what I tell them to try to get them to behave as I would like them to. And it so fundamentally violates the relationship we have with people to do that. It Because once we start down that path, it's pretty impossible to restore what we destroy. When they find out later that you knew the contract was ending and that they were going to be fired, and you knew it 2 months ago and you didn't tell them because you didn't want them to go looking for another job, you never get that relationship back. So also, I think we have to trust one another enough. And again, if we feel like, oh my God, you can't do that, then I would just beg everybody to notice again, 2 months ago, we all began learning about this virus. 3 weeks in, we were all amateur epidemiologists. We were quoting all kinds of things about flattening curves, and we're fast learners because we took that information and we tried to understand it and we tried to craft a sensible action. And in Houston, for example, we flattened the curve. We have sufficient health center capacity, medical center capacity for the people who are going to be critical and will need a bed because of this virus. We set out to do it and we did it. Would we have been better off if someone had kept that a secret and decided to try to manipulate us into that behavior without telling us why? No, because this virus isn't going anywhere. It's going to be with us for a very long time, and we all needed to understand all we could as quickly as possible. I have dozens of other examples, but um, it's we the foundation of trust is that I will tell you the truth as best as I know it, when I know it. That's the fundamental foundation for it. And that includes saying, I don't know if I don't. There's no other way to lead with integrity.
And along, again, following on that a little bit, one of our viewers, Nancy, commented that a lot of the things that you talk about reminds her of training from Brene Brown. But so many of us go to different sources for inspiration. So other than going to angelablanchard.com, what other sources, where do you go when you need a moment to remind yourself of the importance of community or the value of self?
Well, where I've always gone, I write about this and I really mean it. I feel like my life has been spent as close as possible with those people that I say have been shipwrecked. The people that I have the deepest regard for, that inspire me the most, from whom I learn the most, are those that at some point in their lives, the world fell from beneath their feet. They were washed up on that unfamiliar shore. Everything that they had planned and counted on, built and expected to last was gone, and they had to begin again. And we see that in refugees and immigrants. We see that in all of us who've walked away, gotten up the next morning and walked on after a storm wiped away everything we built, our livelihoods, our homes. This is a tough journey, this journey of upheaval, and we're all vulnerable to it. Those of us who've had lives that have been largely predictable, where our expectations have been met, where things that we planned 5 years ago are coming true. We're the exception. And so for me, it's my inspiration comes from those people who find a way to go on, who rebuild their lives out of their own imagination, and they do it with acceptance. Not those on the stool not those hanging out on that stool at the Hard Times and Misery Saloon. And the world is full of those people, because this is a really, this journey we're on is pretty much one of upheaval. And there are a lucky few of us for whom it's been much more predictable, and we can be grateful for that. But we need to embrace the fact that that's not true for many, many people. So.
And talking about human connection, Shannon mentioned the value of human connection in one of her posts on this discussion, but this also reminds me of your view that the thing about connection with family or community is it reminds us of our principles, of our aspirations, a way to get back to who we are, I guess.
I'm Cajun. So, let me just I can sum up everything by saying I'm Cajun. And I just made a huge pot of red beans and rice, by the way. It's not as good as some of my relatives make, but it's pretty good. So I think the thing that reminds us of who we are, everyone around us in some way knows something about us. And when we see them, they reflect that to us. And when we struggle, and when the unthinkable happens, and when our lives are upended as they are now, there's a friend of mine, for example, I call in Florida, and we've known each other for 40 years. And when I'm not sure if I'm going about my life in a way that I'm going to feel good about, I can call her. She reminds me, Angela, this isn't you. This is you. So these mirrors, these close relationships we form are really what sustains us when we go through difficult times, because they're people who remind us of who we are. I'm not really sure I understood that question really well, but I think it's the rituals of being together and those people with whom we have close connections that can remind us of who we are when the upheaval occurs.
Yeah. A testament to your capability of understanding that a very poorly worded statement, and you answered it exactly the way I should have asked your question. So thank you for that. But as we go out of this, Angela, I want to go back to something you said. This pandemic will be with us for some time. And one of the things I loved about what you said in the past is there is enough to go around. I don't know that you specifically meant toilet paper, but you said to act as if there's enough to go around. What do you mean for us? How does that guide us going through things like this?
So, if we believe in an abundant world, my choice is to believe in an abundant world, that this world has sufficient resources for everyone here. So with that said, then what we have is not a scarcity problem. It's a distribution problem. And distribution problems are things that human beings can solve. I want to say, allow me a few minutes here because I want to talk about something real focused. I made decisions every day when I was a CEO, and I make them still in other roles I have, about who gets what, who gets promoted, who gets a scholarship, who wins an award, who gets time, who gets opportunity, who goes to a conference, who gets to speak, who gets time on the agenda. We are allocating resources, time, money, goods, all day long, all the time. If you have any position of leadership, you're doing this already. Sometimes we can be blithely unaware of the impacts of those decisions, or we can pretend that there's no one being disadvantaged by what we're doing. We're just simply making good decisions, and we don't have to think about the people that didn't win this round. And I want to give you an example. This man that I worked with, who he manages many apartments. So you can imagine in the last few weeks, Many people have been unable to pay their rent. So what he said in the beginning really struck me. This is going to be a pain pie, you know? So, and the pain, all of the pain in this cannot be felt by just the residents of the apartment. It's going to have to be shared by the owners, the property managers, the residents. We're all going to have some of this pain pie. It's a good example of somebody who thinks by looking at the whole. And I think when we look at the whole, there's enough to go around if we're willing to consider it and to redistribute things in a way that allows the suffering to be shared. There's really just two things we can do for one another as human beings. One of those things is to help one another develop potential. You can be a good educator, as many people at Lamar are. The other thing we can do is eliminate unnecessary suffering. You know, we can reach out to people who are lonely. We can help people find medical care who need it. We can be with people who are suffering, who've just experienced loss of loved ones. This is what we can do. These two things we can do for one another. And I think that's what we're called in these times to do, is look at how we're doing both and look at the whole and make sure that whatever is there to be distributed is shared, and what suffering there is we eliminate all we can, but that we understand it shouldn't be borne exclusively by any one group of people, and certainly not any group of people over and over and over again. So, but I hope that was helpful.
It was. Let me, I think, Angela, we're sort of approaching the end of our time. Unfortunately, I got a message earlier from Regina who said, keep her talking for 3 hours, right? But
I love Regina.
But let's I guess close this out by Chris asks, do you see some silver linings? I mean, do you see a positive coming from this shared experience of the pandemic?
I think I've already said we should pay attention to the fact that we were willing, an overwhelming majority of people in the world, irrespective of the government and the political system and the economic system under which they were operating, overwhelming majority of the people in the world were willing to come together, act in concert, make sacrifices to protect themselves, their families, and their neighbors. So that's extraordinary. That's already happened. I think it might be just a little bit too soon to look for silver linings. If one of the writings on my website talks about the stages in the aftermath of a disaster, we're not at the how do we reinvent ourselves stage yet. We're in a stage. The first stage is safety. How do we survive? The second is sanctuary, where we're looking for that higher ground. For us, it's been in our homes. Then we move into kind of a limbo. Where do we go from here? We were there for quite a while, and now we're in a stage I call upheaval. In upheaval, it's very much like when your limb falls asleep. And then when the circulation starts to flow again, it hurts. That's where we are now. We're trying to restart our lives. But much of what was previously challenging has become almost impossible, and things that were simple have now become difficult. So that's the stage we're in, and that's not the stage when new and exciting and inspiring brand new plans are formed. We have to get through this stage to acceptance. In other words, we're going to have to learn in this stage what we must learn to live with, what will be different, and then accept that. And out of that acceptance, that opens up a whole new set of possibilities about how we use this. But my view, especially in this country, especially in this state, is we're still in upheaval, and some of us are acting out and throwing tantrums, and some of us are sulking at home, whining, just saying, could have been me a day or two ago. I mean, we're not really ready for the new world and the benefits that are going to come from this yet. We're still coming to terms with the losses and the changes. I say this over and over again, and people tell me it's important and memorable, so I'll say it here. At every milestone, there will be gratitude and grief in equal measure. Because as we reopen and restart our lives, the losses will become apparent. As grateful as we'll be to see one another again, the sense of sadness of what we've missed together, the missed graduations and the missed weddings, the missed rituals of all kinds, which are deeply important to holding us together as human beings. Those losses will be visible. So gratitude and grief in equal measure. As glad as we'll be to be together, there will be sadness. And that's okay. That's all right. That's part of the journey that we're on, and we can do it together.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Angela. We're so grateful to you. I'm embarrassed to have asked you. I know how terribly busy you are.
No, I was so excited to be with you again. Seriously. Well, I mean, there's something about anytime I get to, be in the Golden Triangle, that's such a good, that's home. That's home.
Well, welcome home. We're glad to have you here. And again, Angela, thank you so much. I suspect we're going to have some more questions come up during this thing. We get a lot of visits to this site after the fact. So I'm encouraging anybody who has questions for Angela to go ahead and pose them to us. And Shannon and I know how to reach Angela and can get answers for her.
And please, I ask you, go to my website, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. I actually use those to be connected and get closer to people. So please find me there, and we'll continue the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And to close out our evening, Daniel and his team have prepared a video about Lamar University to close us out. Thank you all again for being here.
In trying times, I'm here for my community.
I will reach my students over any distance.
I'm committed to delivering truth.
Keeping families fed is my purpose.
Taking care of people is my passion.
At Lamar University, I was given the skills I need to provide essential services.
No matter where I am.
I'm still here, helping those in need.
And even though we can't always be face-to-face,
it's because of what I learned at Lamar University that I can be here for you.
Our moment is here.
Our moment is now.
Make the most of it at Lamar University.